It's something that's been working on me, in me, through relationships. And but anyway, I was talking about beloved community. And was a late bloomer in a certain kind of way. I didn't go to school undergrad until I was 38. I went to college right after high school for a semester, but my grandmother had Alzheimer's.
Okay.
And I lived with her. My mom lived across the street. My grandmother lived here, and my grandmother was like my dude. She was my friend. She was hilarious and an extraordinarily brilliant and gifted human being. She was an entrepreneur. She was big mama. And she was hilarious. And she had 2 jobs my whole life. And she loved me, and I knew it, and I adored her. Her name's Sarah. And so she tried to adopt me so that I could get the benefits from my grandfather, because my grandfather was a veteran of the Korean War or something. And at the time, I graduated high school in 81 or so. And at the time, if she adopted me, then I would have got to go to college on my grandfather's GI Bill, right? And I was only 9 years younger than my youngest uncle, her youngest baby boy. And so, but she taught me so much. Like that white stool right there, there's a little white stool in my grandmother's kitchen that I would sit on, and I would work with her in the kitchen. And that white stool was my stool, and it was my first classroom. And she taught me how to do everything. She taught me how to cook. She taught me how to talk to people. She taught me how to clean things. She was amazing. She was, in a very serious way, the first minister that I actually met, because women would come to our house late at night. They'd have trouble, or they need money, or they were abused or beaten, or in some sort of crisis. And she would talk to them, take them in a room and encourage them, lend them money, give them money, talk to them like a therapist, And I learned what those things were later on, because I'm a kid. I don't know nothing about therapy. I don't know nothing about really ministry or nothing.
How old were you about then?
About between 5, I'm talking at the time between 5 and 11, right? But I hung out with my grandmother, and she taught me a lot of stuff. She was really smart, entrepreneurial. She grew all her food. She had a little plot of land next to a house that she paid for by working for other people and cleaning up their house. She was a domestic. Like 70-80% of black women in the South were domestics, But anyway, Sarah was the bomb. But anyway, when I went to college, she was sick. She got early onset Alzheimer's. I think she was 58. And she had an incredible memory. But the stress of taking care of my grandfather, who died of some form of cancer, I think it was colon cancer, took a lot out of her. And, she was working and his primary caregiver. But anyway, when I left for school at 18, my grandmother was starting to do strange things. Like she would put stuff in the refrigerator that wasn't supposed to go in the refrigerator. And she would take food, pies and ices and things out of the back door of her house. And she supplemented her income. In fact, she bought a car she couldn't drive. She paid her house off completely by selling these miniature pies. And she would send them to work with my grandfather, and he would sell them out every day. And she would cook like 20 of them little pies, and they would sell them for maybe 50 cents, 75 cents. And she made a good bit of money, you know. And then, you know, she would, for holidays, you know, she would cook pies and stuff for people. And she taught me how to cook every one of those pies: lemon pies, sweet potato pies, coconut pies, peach cobbler, all that kind of stuff. And so I've always loved sweets. And, but I loved just spending time with my grandmother. And I would sit on a white stool just like that one, was a little lower. And that was my desk, that was my class stool. And she would teach me about life and everything in that kitchen. Anyway, we were traumatized by my grandmother's illness, and my mother kicked me out of the house and made me go to Atlanta so I could go to school. And she said she did it for my own good, and she convinced me it's what my grandmother would want me to do. And so I went back to school. I went back to try to go to school, but I just didn't have the money, so I started working. And I did temp jobs and odd jobs for a while, and I started working for this electric service company as an inside sales customer service person. The white guy was a graduate of Georgia Tech, and he really liked me. He thought I had a degree because, you know, I was big, I had a full beard, and I had put on my resume Morehouse 1981, right? Meaning I'd gone to Morehouse in 1981. You know, I didn't know how to do a resume, so I just said Morehouse 1981. And I thought that's how you did it, where you said, you know, I went to school from this time to this time. But he thought that I was a graduate of Morehouse because of how I spoke and talked and all this other kind of stuff. And so he didn't hire me at first, but then he gave me a chance and I worked for him. And then I got other jobs after that, right? But I owed the school like $6,000 or $7,000, and that was a fortune for us. My father made $14,000, $15,000 a year, and he took care of 5 of us with that. So anyway, I started sending money home to help take care of my grandmother, help take care of my mom, so forth and so on. But I would always, you know, I always wanted to go to the school that Martin Luther King went to, you know. And I knew I had a calling on my life. Yeah. Anyway.
What was it about Morehouse and Dr. King being there that made you want to go there? Because there's thousands of schools and then there's hundreds of HBCUs. So yeah. Dr. King had an impact at a bunch of different HBCUs, but you were committed to going to Morehouse.
So when Martin Luther King died, I was 7. 6.5, 7. And I remember watching the funeral on television and seeing Benjamin Mays deliver the eulogy. I remember like it was yesterday.
He was president of Morehouse at the time?
He was. And, you know, I remember seeing the horse drawing carriage. I remember how sad my mother was. I remember reading about Martin. And I remember more than anything, my mother would get these records, of Martin Luther King sermons. And I would listen to them. And any word I didn't know, I would look it up, learn it, so forth and so on. So, I only applied to 4 colleges in my life, and the only college that I applied to out of high school was Morehouse. That was it. It was the only school I wanted to go to. Now because I was from Texas, I got a full scholarship offer to UT because I did well in high school, and that was automatic. And I remember, because my SAT scores, FAMU actually sent me an acceptance letter. Because they did that. And I found out when I went to school that a lot of my friends had gotten accepted to FAM.
Yeah.
Because they just sent acceptance letters to people that had scored over 14 or something on the SAT or whatever, all black students. They just got accepted, But the only school I ever wanted to go to was Morehouse. And so I didn't know or understand how it
You keep talking.
how it went, But I didn't understand how financial aid worked. I didn't understand how people paid for college, And I had no idea how expensive it was, or I never would have gone.
And this was in 80.
It was in 81.
81.
It was in 81. So I left because I couldn't afford it, and I went back home. And then my mother, like I said, she sent me away. She put me out, and for my own benefit. But I was in Atlanta 18 years, and I grew up, in Atlanta, and I did a lot of things. I sold pagers. I got this job in customer service for electrical service company. Then I got this job at a telemarketing company managing a phone room for the New York Times. Then I started my own businesses. I started a personal service company that I call Sarah Thomas Incorporated, where I did reminder service and events for people. I was entrepreneurial, and that wasn't me, that's my grandmother, And so but I was always trying to get back to school. Yeah. I was always telling people, look, I'm going back, I'm finished, I'm going back. And after a while it became a joke to people, because it was like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Yeah, he's going back to school, he was so smart, da 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 da. And I was ashamed of it. And in 1995, my girlfriend at the time told me, this guy that you're always talking about and you're reading his books and stuff, he's coming to speak here, you should go see him. You've been in this funky kind of way. You should go listen to him, right? And it's Cornel West, and I went to see Cornel West at a church, and he was mesmerizing to me. And I hung around and I waited in line to talk to him. And he has this habit where he will talk to anyone that's in line. He'll say hello to them, da 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 da. And I was one of the last ones, and I couldn't believe how gracious he was. And I said, it was like meeting a rock star to me. In fact, I've never felt about any musician or artist or the way I felt about Cornel West. He was like a superstar to me, you know. So he talked to me and he was really kind. And then I forget exactly what I said to him, but he said, you know something? I can't believe there's not an opportunity for a brother like you at Morehouse. And I want you to call Lawrence Edward Carter. And that's how I got back in school. That's how I got back in school. So Morehouse, and there are other stories, but Martin Luther King was the lodestar for me. You know, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a lawyer and a reverend. And I wanted to do those two things. And I had this guy who gave me a book called Simple Justice, which is the story of Thurgood Marshall. And I used to read it all the time. And I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I read all of Martin Luther King's books because they were small and thin and filled with beautiful words. So eventually, 38 or so, I just went up to the school and I said, you know, I want to come back to school, you know. And the guy I was interviewing with, he was like a dean of admission. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'll never forget this day. He said, I know you. And I said, huh? I said, I know you. He says, you own the store in my neighborhood. And you hired several kids, right? My wife comes to your store and rents videos and movies and music and stuff. So his name was Patillo. And he, you know, I waited to see him like an hour and a half. And then the first thing he said was, I know you. Then he says to me, what can I do for you? And I had prepared this whole speech, introducing myself, like how I'd always tried to carry myself like a Morehouse man. And, you know, I felt like I needed to go to school and all that kind of stuff. And he accepted me on the spot.
Wow.
The other thing was that he sent his assistant down to find my records from when I'd been in school maybe 13 years earlier. And my tenure was so old that they couldn't find my transcript because it wasn't in the computer. You know, those records were in a warehouse somewhere, you know, in boxes.
Yeah.
And the guy accepted me on the spot. He forgave the money that I owed. And he said, you need to get together a few $1,000s, and we'll get you in. Welcome back to Morehouse. Yeah. And one miracle right after the other, you know. And I knew when I was sitting there waiting to talk to him, just like right now, like I know this is the right thing that we are doing, telling the story of beloved community and upgrading the way that we convey what beloved community is. Beloved community starts with my grandmother and my mother. It starts with my mom teaching me to read when I was dyslexic at 3.5. It starts with prayer circles. And it's great, man. So anyway, I went to Morehouse. I did well. The second year, I got this thing called Oprah Winfrey Diamond in the Rough scholarship, which was for single parents, which I was, who were going back to school. Had my name on it. And Patillo, hooked me up with it. And I didn't have to pay a dime for school. And not only that, I got a stipend. I made straight A's for 3 years. And I started thinking about what I wanted to do. The young men that I was working with, I was almost old enough to be their father, but not quite. But I was certainly old enough to be an uncle. And they just adopted me. They taught me how to use email, computers, the internet, all this stuff that I didn't really know. The way education and stuff had changed.
Yeah.
And, I had read hundreds of books by this time. And my head was full of stuff, but it wasn't as organized. And I didn't know exactly what denomination, I knew I was going to be a minister. I knew that I was going to follow in King's footsteps as best I could. I knew I was a social justice oriented person. So in a certain way, beloved community was inevitable. I got a scholarship to go to Princeton, and I went to graduate school because Martin Luther King had gone to graduate school. And I had questions about the Bible, about history, about things. And I was like, I'm gonna learn. And so I wanted to study Greek, Hebrew, Ugaritic, French, and German, so that I could read scholarship about religion, and so that I could read the Bible for myself in the original languages. And so I came to school and applied myself to do just that, because that's what good ministers did. They went and they got training, or they worked under somebody and got training, So I went through Morehouse, went to Princeton. I got reacquainted with Cornel West, who started my journey, because he came back to Princeton after he left Harvard, and we met again. And he would take me to dinner every Thursday, had me audit several of his classes, and then I ended up in the PhD program at Princeton University in religion, ethics, and politics, and being mentored by Jeff Stott and Cornel West. So when I graduated from the seminary, I wanted to go back to Atlanta, because Atlanta was home to me. And, I wanted to get a job at a church, and I had figured out a whole theology and a whole perspective and all that kind of stuff. And during that time, I was writing a thesis, and I went to California, Oakland, San Francisco area to visit these ministers that were doing things like feeding people, right? There was this minister in San Francisco that was feeding the homeless people every day, and it started a kitchen, right, that fed homeless people. And there's this other minister named J. Alfred Smith, who was one of the first black ministers to ordain a woman. And he was also head of a very progressive black denomination, American Baptist denomination. So I went, I had a fellowship to do my thesis, So I went to Oakland, which is across the bay from San Francisco, and to see how these guys were doing it. And on my way back, I got caught in the storm. The plane from California got caught in the storm, and it was late. So I didn't get back to New Jersey until, I don't know, like 1 o'clock in the morning. And the only thing I could do was get from the airport on a bus to get to Newark. But there was nothing from Newark to Princeton. Everything had shut down. And so, because of the storm. Okay. And that night, on the bus, I met the bus driver.
What year was this about?
2003, 2004. And this bus driver, he had a what's called sonorous or resonant voice. Like when he talked, it sounded like his voice was being amplified by a microphone, but it was just his voice. And he was a bus driver. And he picked me up, took me to the airport, then brought me back to the Newark station. He says, he's not going to be doing anything here. And when he brought me back to Newark, after the train station closes, the homeless people. And on this bus ride, this guy said, "You know what I am?" I said, "No, sir. What are you?" He said, "I'm an urban gardener." And he talked to me about planting trees and a garden in the city. And as I listened to him, I realized he wasn't talking to me about gardening at all. He was talking to me about people.
Growing people in the cities.
That's right. And it was as real as you and I talking, right? But it felt almost like a dream kind of thing. And I hung out that night with people, homeless people in Newark. And I realized that this was kind of a calling kind of experience. That night, I had a dream. And in that dream, there was a sign hanging in a field. And the sign said, "Beloved Community." And I remember walking up to the sign because it was like a neon sign. I was like, what is lighting this sign? It's not connected to anything, just hanging in the air. And I was like, beloved community what? Beloved community Baptist? Beloved community Presbyterian? At the time, I was dually ordained. And so I was just trying to figure out, well, what job am I supposed to get? And I thought God was giving me guidance. And I walked around the sign for a minute, and I realized nothing is holding up this sign but God. And it's not just beloved community, church, or denomination. It's beloved community is what I'm supposed to work toward, found, right? Then it started in this field. The field was wheat, and it started to rain. And the rain fell in letters And it was words falling. Love, word, spirit, peace, joy greater. Fell in order just like that. And the rain were letters Love. So I was reading it, right? And then the letters for love in agape, right? And ahav in Hebrew and Greek, right? And each of the words, they were falling, but the words that were being spelled by the raindrops were these principles, these words in different letters. And it was like a movie, right? And they fell in order, and I could read them. And I just wept. And I woke up, and it was clear to me what I was supposed to do. And I told Rodney lied. I called Rodney. And I said, Rodney, man, I just had this experience. And I started to talk to him about the love community. I started to talk to him about these principles. And then as I wrote them down, and I started to, it was like a revelation came into my head, and it was whole. It's almost like being given a novel in your head all at one time. And everything I had studied in school made sense. Everything that had happened to me made sense. Everything that the bus driver said made sense. A couple of times I went back to Newark late at night to try to run into this bus driver to thank him, but he didn't work there.
That's crazy.
Right?
He was meant to do what he was supposed to do.
Dude, it was like an angel type thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't even, I'm a scientist. I don't even believe in stuff like that, but then I do, because I've had all these experiences. Like that Oprah Winfrey scholarship that I got, I went into the bursar's office to see if I could borrow money to pay for my books that semester, right? I was happy. I wasn't salty at all. I was like, I know I could probably borrow some money. And so I went to the bursar's office to see how do I go about borrowing money, because I got, these books are expensive. It was killing me, like $200, which was a lot for me back in 2000, anyway. When I finally got up to the bursing line, and I asked the lady, I'm trying to see if I can get a book voucher or borrow some money and talk to somebody, because I got to pay for my books, and I'm broke, And so she said, okay, baby, let me look up your account. And she said, well, here's your balance. And she showed me the sheet, right? And it had like $6,300. And I was like, that don't sound quite right. I didn't realize I owed that much, Mm-hmm. And she says, no, baby, this is in brackets, right? Meaning that my bill was a negative $6,320 something.
Oh wow.
She's like, we owe you this. I mean, you have this credit on your account. She explained to me, And I've been getting letters at home that I just figured there was bills. And I was like, I know I'm in school, I'm gonna pay y'all, right? So I didn't open up none of the letters, right?
Yeah.
I just, I was like, I'm gonna pay y'all. I promise, this is a chance of a lifetime. I'm gonna make it happen. If I had opened up those letters, I would have known that I gotten this scholarship plus a stipend, and it would have taken away some of my anxiety. But that's not.
It wasn't time yet.
It wasn't time for me to know. But that was a miracle, and I just sat there and I cried. I was like, you know, y'all take the Bible too literally. You can't take all this stuff literally, right? And plus, the Bible is a library. That's what Biblia means. It means library. It's not one book, it's many books. But they're inspired and there are connections between them. But you got to study to understand the difference between Jeremiah and Malachi and Elijah and so forth. You know what I'm saying? You got to really study that stuff. It ain't that kindergarten. This ain't Sesame Street. You gotta know. Study show thyself approved, rightly dividing the word. And you gotta study. You gotta know. You gotta open up your mind. So anyway, but my beef with a lot of my peers in seminary is that they were into superstition. You understand what I'm saying? And they thought that God was too holy to question. And that was never my relationship with God. Right? I would rather honestly believe than dishonestly pretend to be faithful. As Augustine says, true faith begins with doubt. And I had questions and doubts and all this other kind of stuff. But when this revelation hit me, everything started to make sense. And that love was the first principle. For a lot of people, the Bible is the first principle. Right? For Muslims too, the Quran and the Bible is their first principle. Right? And the Bible is extraordinarily valuable and important. But what was our relationship with God before Scripture was written down?
Before it was written.
Right. And
love.
Thousands of years. Love had to be the first principle, right? And love had to be the way of understanding Scripture. Love had to be it. And so, when the revelation hit me and love was the first principle, I was like, yep.
That's it.
That's it.
That's the answer.
That's the answer. And that's what you have to found a ministry on. That's what you have to found, right?
Yeah.
So that was big to me. And it answered the things that I was struggling with. You know what I'm saying? It just answered a lot of stuff. That love had to be the first principle. And love had to be the first test. And love had to be what it was about. So, man, I could just go on and on about this stuff. But the point is that with love being the first principle of my faith, the faith in God, it made everything else fall in the line and make sense. And there are lots of things that I came to realize as this revelation fell into my heart and my head. One thing that I realized was that all virtues are aspects of love. That everything else comes out of love. So
I was about to ask you about that. I was just about to ask that.
All virtues come out of love. They are the way that love manifests itself in different situations and in different sort of constructs. So a virtue is a habit. Right? It's also a form of energy. When a woman is healed with the issue of blood and she touches Jesus in a crowd, but Jesus feels something special about her touch. And in the scripture it says, well, what do you mean somebody touched you? And Jesus says, I felt virtue go out of me. I felt life, energy be drawn from me. And he said, someone touched me. He looked around and he pinpointed her and, called her to him and said, basically, your faith has made you whole. Right? The virtues. When I was at the Princeton University studying religion, ethics, and politics, the virtue ethics was the field that I wanted to be a public intellectual and a pastor. I kind of mix of Cornel West and Martin Luther King. Makes sense, right? So I was really trying to understand ideas and theology and so forth, and why there was so much discord between religions and between intellectuals, you know, left and right, and you know, and it wasn't that way for me. I understood, you know, and it's because love was the first principle, and that every real virtue was an aspect of love. So love was a virtue, the virtue. And so courage, kindness, the fruit of the Spirit, all these things are virtues that come out of love, the way love shows up. And the thing about love is that love is amazing in that it's not perfect, right? That love meets us where we are, you know? And there are ways of loving that are just amazing. And that most of the time that people have conflict is because they misunderstand love. And they misunderstand the nature of love. And they try to make love an idol. They try to make love something fixed, and it's not. So, that love was the first principle of a love community. It made all the sense in the world to me. And it reconciled my religious mind, my philosophical mind, my political mind. And it brought me back to Martin. It brought me back to my grandmother. You know, and it made sense that God is love. The word is the second principle for a lot of reasons. But the primary reason is something that I learned when I was in church and coming up in Christianity, that Jesus was the Word. In John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. The Word was with God, right? And without the Word was there nothing made that was made, right? The Word is the second principle, the Logos, right? That's the word for word in John. It's Greek, right? The word for word in Hebrew is the word debar, which means a wilderness. And so when these things were falling out of the sky, word dropped down, and then DBR or debar, Logos. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And it started to make sense. In the Old Testament, the word was unclear. The word was a wilderness. It was the bar is like stuff. It's like thing, and it can be monstrous stuff, right? Disoriented stuff, right? But also it can be words and things that give life. Like the Ten Commandments are called the 10 words, right? In the Old Testament. And so word reorders reality, right? Word reorders reality. Word reorders reality, right? In the New Testament, it talks about the Rhema word, right? But here's the thing, and this may be a bit esoteric for some people, but we do not understand things unless we have words as a handle for them. They don't make sense unless they're in sentences or words. There is a school of philosophy called structuralism that talks about the way the mind develops and works, and language is fundamental to that. History is fundamental to that. So also, in Greek, the word logos, it means both counting and story. And when you read the etymology and the stories of words, it starts to make sense how they hang together and how they come to mean what they mean. But you have to be careful about how you use words, and and you have to be open to the irony that's often in words, right? I have to tell you this because this is very relevant to the second principle of beloved communion word. My mother saw me watching a commercial one day on television. I was 2.5 or so. And it was a commercial about Lorna Doones. I've even looked it up on YouTube in my 40s, right? And in the Lorna Doone commercial, they had the letters dancing across the screen. Lorna Doone is based upon a legend in Ireland, but the letters for Lorna Doone were dancing across the screen. They were going to the box. And I figured out at 2.5 that those letters, right, were the words on the box, and the letters meant the cookies. And Lorna Doones were my favorite cookies.
Yeah.
And my mom watched me watching television and watched me take my finger and trace the letters that go all the way to the box. And I was like, Nana Lorna Donna. I was saying I wanted some Lorna Doones. And my mother walked up behind me. I could still see her face in the black and white TV screen. And she said, my baby's smart, right? Because she interpreted that as me learning how to read. Right? At 2.5. And so she dedicated herself to teaching me how to read. At that moment.
Out of the virtue of?
The commercial.
The virtue of love, though.
Out of the virtue of love, no doubt.
That's why she did it.
That's why she did it. And so she loved to read, and she taught me to read. What she couldn't know was that I was dyslexic, that phonemic awareness wasn't going to work for me.
Right.
So it was hard for my mother to teach me how to read. Very difficult. But her belief that I was smart in the first place kept her working with me and pressing with me, whatever. And so she noticed I had a good memory, and she also noticed that there were certain words I couldn't get. Like, the word island is still a mystery to me. The word friend. The word play, for some reason. The P's used to look like B's, and the B's look like P's, and the whole blended consonant thing it's crazy. But I love stories. And I remember my mother saying to me, every word is a story. Every word is a picture. Right? And so I learned through stories and pictures. And I eventually associated the stories and pictures with words. It's one of the reasons when I preach, I give etymologies and stories about how words came to mean what they mean, and the words break up into parts, and how fascinating it is. But it shaped my intellectual reality, and it also shaped my spiritual reality. So that Jesus was the Word, I understand Jesus as a way for us to understand our relationship with God. The Word explains to us, makes possible for us to understand the love of God, the intention of God toward us. Jesus is the Word, and the Word is the second principle and on down the line. Spirit is the third principle of love community. Spirit is ruah, wind, breath. It is breath that God breathes into dust and we become living souls. So I understood spirit is God's technology, God's way of doing everything, and that ultimately reality is spiritual. Now, I am talking, when I say reality, about ontology. I'm talking about the way everything is. I'm talking about subatomic structure, where things seem like they're still, but they're made of atoms that are moving super fast. That is spirit to me. And it's also technology. And it's also how everything that God manifests and does is done. And God is spirit, this ever dynamic, super powerful, tiny and enormous reality. I used to read books on science and black holes and physics and the material world. And it fascinated me that everything is made of these moving parts. And all of the combinations that there are in chemistry and so forth come from what I think of as spirit. So spirit was God's method of doing everything. And God's method of doing everything and manifesting God's reality in the world is through spirit. So it's through the Holy Spirit that God made reality in partnership with the Word so it could be understood because of love.
Why else? Why else would we do it?
Why else?
Why love has to be the first principle.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yep. Because love is generative. It generates life and possibility. And yep. So the rest of the principles just fell out of the sky. It's like when Nicodemus goes to Jesus, Jesus says, "You must be born again." The phrase is actually born from above. So the beloved community thing just made sense. It was like an answer to everything. The fourth principle is the principle of peace, or shalom, or eirene. Eirene in Greek, shalom in the Hebrew. And there's a tension between eirene and shalom, but it's also a complementarity. The word shalom actually means the presence of God. When we have the presence of God, we have all we need, and therefore we can be at peace. We don't have to fight, vie, contest. In Genesis, what the serpent does in the garden is to reinforce insecurity in human beings. And the serpent does this by lying to them and telling them, inferring that God doesn't want them to be what God has given them. right? That God's trying to keep something, that insecurity.
That God's selfish.
Right. Which is certainly a lie in and of itself, and it's obvious if you're even in the story. But everything that we need is in the garden. Everything that we need is there, including the presence of God. And our susceptibility to lies and dishonesty and insecurity, right, is death. It's not love, it's death. It's why we turn on each other. The opposite of love is not actually hate, it is betrayal. Because love is an action. And betrayal is to act against love. But anyway, peace is the presence of God, which is abundance, answers. It's in the center of the 7 principles of beloved community. The thing about spiritual virtues, which all these principles are, I'm going to tell you this, man. You know, I studied in school a lot, and I read, and I was a good student, you know. But I didn't quite understand certain things, and sometimes I'd have to reread things and restudy things to try to figure out, what's this guy talking about? What's this lady talking about? When this revelation came to me, everything made sense. Everything made sense that I learned, right? One of the things about peace, I was taking part in a rally, right? And I heard people say, no justice, no peace, right? And this reporter came up to me and said, why peace? Why is peace so important? And, you know, I was a minister, I was leading my congregation at the time, and I said to her, I said it just like this, never read it anywhere, nothing. I just said it to her, because she asked me a question, right? I said to her, peace is a virtue. Peace is a spiritual virtue. And like all spiritual virtues, you cannot have it unless you want it for everyone. There's nothing selfish in virtue. Virtue is what you want for everyone. And when you want that virtue for everyone, when you're willing to share that virtue, that's when you possess it. And peace was the virtue that taught me that about all virtues. They are formidable but fragile. Right? Because God is present in peace and arene, there's no conflict. That's what arene means, the cessation of war. Shalom means the presence of God and the abundance of the harvest, right? So you don't have to fight other people to get stuff. God has put it in the ground and in the sky, and if you just, right, till, right, it will spring forth for you. God gives an increase. But if God is present, what we should feel is joy. That joy is the presence of God. Joy is the presence of God. You know, us realizing that God is present. I remember when I first preached the 7 principles of beloved community, I remember saying about how when you love someone and they show up, that's all they need to do. That you are fulfilled by just their presence. They ain't got to do nothing for you. That's joy. And that joy is what God wants for us in life. But we can't have it unless we're willing to share it. Because it's a spiritual virtue. Joy is music, joy is art, joy is creativity, joy is sex, joy is bliss, joy, right? But the thing about joy, as with all spiritual virtues, is that they are sorrow tinged. In other words, sorrow helps us appreciate joy, right? And it's the difference between joy and happiness. Happiness is feeling good about stuff, right? Happiness is positive vibes and feelings and all this, you know. Happiness is like bubbles. I love bubbles, right? They're a miracle, and they're perfectly cylindrical, and they're like colorful and playful. And if you want to take pictures of kids, just, you know, throw some bubbles in the frame, and they just, you know, it's like magic to them, right? You know, that's happiness, and it's fleeting and ephemeral, and sometimes you try to touch it or grasp it, and it goes away, right? But if you just experience it and enjoy it, you know, happiness is a good thing. But joy, right? You don't have to be happy to experience joy. You experience joy even in the midst of sorrow. It's by appreciating, right, what you have, what you will have, knowing that God is present always with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Even when I was at some of my lowest points, and during those 14 years I was out of school, wanting to go to school, wanting to be something, God was always with me. Joy is a response to peace, the presence of God. Sometimes we feel that God is absent. Sometimes we do bad things. Sometimes bad things happen to us. Sometimes we make mistakes. We are fallible human beings. We are, right? What does the Revelation say about sin and the brokenness of people and betrayal and all this other kind of stuff? And the answer to that is grace. It is obvious that grace is a spiritual virtue. You can't have it unless you're willing to show it. Jesus teaches how to pray. Forgive us this day. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That teaches that grace is a spiritual virtue. That you can't activate grace unless you're willing to give grace and show grace. And when you learn the power of giving grace and showing grace, right? The sacrifice of Jesus is the ultimate act of love and grace and generosity. This not holding on to things and letting go of things is one of the keys of faith. Our tendency as humans to reify, to hold on to things, or to make things a big deal, whether it's shoes or sex or money or any object. We have a tendency to idolize, make an idol, a fixed thing out of something that is valuable to us. That they had valorized and loved and all of that, but they shifted to the Democratic Party that had been their enemies because they didn't make an idol of the Republican Party.
So they did at first, or they didn't make?
They valorized the Republican Party because
of Abraham Lincoln.
the Republican Party was actually founded by abolitionists. The party was founded by abolitionists. And the party picked Abraham Lincoln, right? So Republicanism was founded on the principle of emancipation and so forth. And black people revered it. My grandfather and great-grandmother, they were devout Republicans. You know, I grew up in the South. But black people were able to figure out that it's not about the party, it's about the principles. White people can learn something from black people today. But that's my example of an idol. And anything can become an idol. Right? Anything can become an idol. My whole intellectual life, you know, there were concepts and things that were important to me. And like my blackness, I'm blacker than blacker than black. But blackness can't become an idol. Right?
Right.
Because you have to be able to see that it's just a tool, it's just a thing of beauty, and it can change. And there's some people that are white that are black because of what they believe and what they do and how they live, you know? And so you can't make an idol of a phenotype. You can't make an idol of a political party. You can't make an idol of an economic system. That things are meant to change. Everything must change. Yes. Quincy Jones wrote a beautiful song when he was going through divorce from his beloved wife. Everything must change. Change. Nothing stays the same. Everyone will change. No one stays the same. This is a part of the key of grace, and this is a part of the key of the real faith, and not making an idol out of anything, anyone, any denomination, any business, any person, right? And when we make an idol out of things, that's when we become brittle, and that's when we don't have forgiveness. We consider it a betrayal if someone changes, if someone is different, if someone is going in one direction and they decide, I don't want to go in that direction anymore. Do you really love them, or do you love that they were doing what you told them to do, or satisfying, right? Our need to control and all this other kind of stuff. Fundamental to reality, fundamental to the spirit, fundamental to the word, fundamental to love is the concept of grace. And idolatry is the opposite of grace. Fixity is the opposite of grace.
And that's like rules.
Yeah, rules. Yeah, you know, rules govern nature. There's a certain molecular structure to water. There's a certain molecular structure to molecules, right? And so there are rules, but there's also change and dynamism. Water can take different forms, and the atoms can behave in different ways. In relationships, one of the things, I'm on my third marriage now, my third relationship now, you know? And one of the things that I learned in this process, right, was that I had to be open to me changing, and I had to be open to my partners changing. You know, and with my first wife, I try to control things too much, and I didn't realize that I was changing. I didn't realize that she was changing, and there was too much sort of fixity and romanticism, and the not enough grace, right? Not enough grace. Joy is a response to peace. Grace is the fix-it mechanism. Grace is the mechanic to the old car. Grace is that which fixes things that get out of alignment or broken, right? Grace is change and being able to deal with change. Grace is being able to forgive even when you feel betrayed. That's the hardest thing.
That's hard.
Super hard, right?
But you gotta, how can you be free?
Right. Grace, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say, Malachi, 70% of my people, my friends who are in trouble because they can't change, right? They hold on to things, they idolize things, right? They can't forgive. Grace for us in terms of relationships and stuff is the whole piece. Because when you, remember what I said about spiritual virtues? You can't have it
Unless you will share.
right. And so if you want to be free, freedom is a spiritual virtue.
Yeah.
You have to give freedom. Grace is the operative principle of forgiveness, and it just is. It's it makes it work. It makes it possible. One of the things my mother did when we were little is my mom went to used stores and got toys that were in good condition,
Mm-hmm.
puzzles, right? And she made my brother and I love to put things together and figure out things. Now, at the time she was doing this, I had no idea, right, that this is like MIT advice on developing cognitive skills in children, right?
Yeah.
Give them puzzles, teach them puzzles, let them work out puzzles, right? My mom is amazing, but grace is this principle that allows us to put the pieces back together.
Yeah.
And to see patterns and to understand, there's a movie, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, right? And at the end of the movie, after all of the shenanigans and Willy Wonka has just got Charlie left. He's the only one who made it through. And Willy Wonka, is acting really mean to him. At the end, it's like, well, according to this line of the contract, written in fine print, etc., 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 and he's talking to him like a very judgmental teacher and saying, you touched the walls in this thing when you and Uncle Charlie got caught in the bubbles, and so because of that, you're disqualified, right? And there's been this guy that's been trying to buy the gobstopper from them, paying them a lot of money, and he has a gobstopper in his pocket. You ever see Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory?
Yeah, I have.
So Willy Wonka turns his back on Charlie, tells him to get out, And, right? Charlie takes the gobstopper out of his pocket and he gives it to Willy Wonka. Why does he give it to him? I'll tell you why he gives it to him. He's looking around the room and he sees all this art, right? He sees a statue, he sees a picture, and all of it is in half. And he figures out that the theme of this moment, of this room, of this relationship, is that he's just seeing half of Willy Wonka. That's not the whole person. The whole person is the funny guy, the singing guy, right? And this sort of businessman.
Yeah.
And he realizes that he's flawed, but he's good.
You can't make a judgment out of him.
You see?
He's a human.
And that act of grace, I think Willy Wonka says something like, and out of one pure heart, an act of kindness. Right?
Yeah.
That's grace.
That's great.
That's grace. That's grace. And it is the penultimate principle of beloved community. The last principle that fell into Revelation was the principle of hope. And over the course of preaching the principles of the beloved community, hope is a virtue. It's a spiritual virtue. You can't have it unless you give it. It is fragile but formidable. Hope, 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 hope. In Greek, hope is this word elpis. It comes from an ancient story, I think in the Hesiod, Pandora's jar. We know it as Pandora's box. The little mischievous girl who goes in and opens up the box and all of the really horrific stuff gets out in the world. And she realizes she's done something. And then almost too late, she shuts the box closed. And there's only one thing left in the box. Hope. The point of the myth is that the only thing that we have to fight all of the demonic stuff that is unleashed by curiosity and carelessness, right? Mischievousness. The only thing that we have that the gods allowed us to keep is hope. What I tell people at Beloved Community is hope is remembering the future. Remembering God's love and God's intent for you. God's plan for you. And you can have hope when things are going completely against you. You can have hope when things don't seem to be going your way at all. Not so with optimism. And positive thinking is generally a good thing, but it is not faith. It is not hope. It is not the promise. And optimism can be deadly. They did a study of people who were in concentration camps or in prison, prisoners of war. And they found out that the optimistic people, they held up for a little while, but when things didn't turn in their favor, when they weren't freed or emancipated or let go, that slowly but surely their optimism diminished until they gave up.
You can't hold on to optimism.
You cannot.
It's like motivation.
But hope, the people with hope, they made it through, especially when things weren't going their way. In fact, in many ways, the story of the Bible itself is a story of hope in almost impossible circumstances and situations. Hope is the ultimate purpose and principle of our faith. Because hope is the ultimate purpose and principle of the work of our faith, that what we generate through the arc of all those principles in our life is generating hope. Hopelessness, anguish, the body keeps the score, traumatization, all of it has power and takes over from us because a loss of hope. But all those virtues and the positive things, starting with love, which is all of them, right? If you opened up love, what you find in that package, what you find in that wrapper, what you find in that box are all the virtues as aspects. You know, the word aspect means face, right? The way something appears from a certain angle and from a certain light. It's like a facet, right? A facet is the face of a diamond, and a diamond sparkles because it has many facets, and light hits it and it reflects in different directions.
Yeah.
Love is, right, the ultimate reality in the universe. It is God. And virtues and faith are the way love shows up in different circumstances. Beloved community is a reality. When people realize that God loves them and that they are loved, they can overcome, they can do, they can achieve, they can love in every circumstance. The thing that keeps people broken, addicted, heartbroken, lonely, failing, is that they don't think that they're loved. I taught in prison for 10 years. And the first assignment I have everyone do is to write an essay called Who Am I? And I taught over 1,000 students in 10 years, 9 years. 1,000. It was amazing to me how many times in the story of these souls that people lost faith because they didn't feel like they were loved. I've almost lost faith several times. The church didn't grow. You know, we never started a school, Beloved Community School. We never, grew into a mega ministry. We never developed housing and business, all this other stuff, all these great dreams that I have for Beloved Community, And certain times I would get discouraged about what wasn't happening. Then one day about 5 years ago, 6 years ago actually, I realized that we were all Beloved Community and that people were doing amazing things and it was all a part of Beloved Community. It just wasn't happening in the way that I thought it was going to happen, but it was happening in our individual lives. I wanted to start a school, maybe 300-400 families. I ended up being president of a school board, helping 11,000 families. That was Beloved Community. Yeah. I wanted an incredible men's ministry, right? Because I felt I'd learned some things about being a man, about being a father, about being a husband, a lover, or whatever. A lot of men never came to Beloved Community at one time. We always had a few good men, right? I was in prison. I had 1,000 students, all men. And I taught them much of the stuff that I'm laying out for you. and prison, helping incarcerated and post-incarcerated people became a vocation of me. It was beloved community, right? I probably know more about prison education and what's called andragogy or adult education, how to teach people, how to recover their life, how to start over. And then the things that I was ashamed of actually became badges of honor for me, right? I could stand in front of 200 incarcerated people and tell them, today, you're going to be able to start college today by the time I finish talking. And you know what? You can do it, right? I know you think you're old. I know you think you lost your chance, but you're not. I tell them, I didn't go to school till I was 38 years old. And today I've studied at the finest institution. I've been to Columbia, I've been to Princeton, I've been to Morehouse, right? And I've learned so many things, and I've helped so many people in the last 20 years of my life. And I can say all these things that I was ashamed of have become badges of honor, have become credentials, right? You can overcome it. I'm here to tell you, you can redeem this time. In certain ways, I'm an incredible success. And then there are other things, you know, my friendships with Rodney Lyde and your father and your mom and Sister Frederick and I can just go down the list. And Jackie, who's doing a global health ministry now. I ordained Jackie, and she was one of the first founders of Beloved Community 18 years ago. In fact, she wrote the first check. The first offering came from her. And I work with her and I encourage her all the time because she's a great person, right? And I love her, you know. But she's known all over the United States. That's Beloved Community. So I'm going to stop here, but I'm going to say this. A part of what I've realized in the last 4 or 5 years is that, and COVID actually taught me this, is that the structure of Beloved Community, its openness, right? We never, not once, tried to buy a building. Not one time, right? We made a commitment to give away between 10 and 20% of all of our income, to give it away to people we didn't even know. Not people that were associated with the church, right? Just give it away to Native Americans battling COVID, people who went through a hurricane or another crisis, folk who nobody will give money to because they think they're going to do the wrong thing for. You follow me?
Yeah.
My love of technology and reading and movies and, you know, film and all this kind of stuff, I always thought that was just quirky little stuff. Beloved Community is a relationship. Beloved Community is an open thing. It's not doctrinaire. And it seeks to empower people through love. First, knowing that they're loved. Two, unlocking the potential, the capacity of them loving and accepting folks. I actually think this is the perfect time for Beloved Community. I'm going to tell you something. Remember when I told you at the beginning of our time together that I felt this moment was like a fruition moment? I believe that Beloved Community is going to be one of the most dynamic, spiritual entities in this country. And it's going to be young people, right? It's going to be young people. It's going to be people like you and River and, you know, people who have come through us and gone on to do other things. Guys that I taught in prison. Because we're not asking you to come and sit down and listen just on Sunday between this block. We're going to make available the teachings and, right, the love of beloved community where you can listen to it while you're driving or at night, or, right, asynchronous Bible study. Think about that.
Yeah.
Right? And then organizing it where people have access and where the revelation starts to make sense to them like it has made sense to me. Made sense to a lot of us. That's it, bro. That's what we're trying to do. I also think that, and I've always believed this. My mother said this to me. Beloved Community is a leadership institute. My mother said to me, Toby, there's something about the way that you're not intimidated by anybody and that you can talk to leaders, right? And that eventually people are going to come to you, leaders who have resources, but they're discouraged. And you're going to be able to encourage them. I believe Beloved Community is going to be fundamentally a leadership institute. And that's what I believe its denominational gift will be. Also, you know, the stuff we did with those kids at Princeton, bringing them on campus, and, you know, all of the little creative things, I think we'll be able to, like, I'm working with a rites of passage program now at a private school in Trenton. Anyway, that's what we're doing. So I'm gonna stop there.
That's perfect.